All right, good afternoon. We'll call the July 16th Land Use Advisory Committee meeting to order. First thing we have is the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgement. We're doing this once a quarter. I believe we did this last month. Currently, we have approval of the agenda. Everyone's gotten a chance to review the agenda. Any changes, modifications? None? All right. We'll look for an approval for the May 21st, 2026 Land Use Advisory Committee meeting minutes. Looking for a motion?
I'll move to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Second, all right. Any discussion? None. All in favor, please signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. That passes. All right, we got a couple of information items. First, we have the release of the 2025 Generalized Land Use Inventory, and we got Paul Hampton.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, for having me. It's been a long time since I've sat at one of these tables and gave a presentation, so.
Tie appropriate.
Thank you.
Yes.
I try to look fancy. Well, thank you. So yeah, I'm here to just tell you a little bit about the 2025 Generalized Land Use Layer that we've been working on since the end of 2025. Next slide.
It's right there.
Oh, thank you. I didn't know if it was in the back.
You have the power.
That's good, that'll be helpful. So today I'm just gonna talk about what the land use inventory is to provide you a little context of what it is and what it isn't. And then just go over some of the initial findings that we found and kind of some of the trends that we're seeing. And then hopefully if you have any questions, we'll go through those and any discussions. So what is the land use inventory? This is something that the council has been doing every 3 to 7 years. Typically, we try to do it about every 5 years. It is a snapshot in time based off, this latest one was based off of April 2025. This is when we had aerial imagery flown, and that's what the primary driver is of defining what we call the land uses in the inventory. We also leverage other resources out there, such as the assessor's information, tax information, and but it is not the end all. We also use our building permit survey information, and we search the internet to give us clues of what we see on the ground. It represents what we call existing use, and I just clarify that it is not necessarily what the tax assessor calls the use. Keep in mind that the assessors are trying to levy a tax on a property, and so they tend to use a coding scheme that works for that. And the classic example is public land. So anything from a park to a government building or a fire station or even a school can be called public. Well, we want to have a little more definition than that, so we use a different classification scheme. It is also not land use guidance. That comes from the city's comprehensive plans for their 2040 or it will be 2050 plans coming up, and that is guiding the land of what can be here, but underneath that umbrella of that guidance could be multiple zoning types that are going on. And it is not necessarily land cover. We can have the same sort of cover going on with a different use when you think about grass, lawn services. So just keep in mind that we're trying to identify what we view as the active use of that property at that point in time. I should also say that we do align it, and it's not on the slide, but we do try to align it with parcel data. However, we do go down to the sub-parcel level. An example of that would be like a 5-acre lot. From a city's perspective, it might be all residential because that's what's on there, the person owns it. But when we look at the aerial imagery and think about how it's being used, maybe only 1 acre of that 5 acres is actually being mowed and actively, gardened and all of that. And the rest might be a wetland or something else out there. And so we will subdivide those properties based on the appropriate land use at the time. We interpret it with these items to help us, and we lump it into a generalized land use, a uniform land use category schema so that we have apples to apples comparisons across the region. This uniform has been developed kind of over time as we've been doing it to identify what's most useful, but it has not changed since 2000. So we have a very consistent palette to look at trends in the last 25 years. Once we have completed the process, or at least the initial data gathering, we do make city level maps available for communities to review and comment on. This last time we received back about 56% of the communities received or provided as comments, which is not great, but it's typically when we don't hear something, they don't really find anything wrong. Also, some of these communities will use our information, but others have their own resources. So for them, it doesn't really maybe have the same appeal for them. Why do we do this? Well, one of the main drivers is to understand land consumption in the region, understand the development trends, and this can all help us in developing our forecast and land supply models. So when we look at developing our regional land use guide or planning guide, we have those pieces of information to help us understand how much land is being used, what it's being used for, what are some of the implications of those uses in terms of water use or transit needs or affordable housing. And so as I said, those last three things, that's kind of another way that this data is being used for either climate analysis or modeling efforts that are out there, or any other sort of kind of analysis across the region. It is also used by a lot of communities. They'll use it in their comprehensive plans, or it'll serve as their existing land use. The one maybe drawback or a criticism that we've had is we do this every 5 years. It's not every year, and cities like to have a better representation, and so they may take our data and modify it, but often either they have their own or they leave it with the 5-year cycle that we do. So just some of the initial findings. The annual land use consumption rates have been fairly stable since the mid-2000s. The single-family residential and particularly single-family detached is the main driver of land consumption. And when I talk about land consumption, this is not necessarily thinking about redevelopment, but actually greenfield development, either undeveloped or agricultural land that tends to be used for growth in the region. To accommodate this growth, we are using less land. We can see that in the trends. This is partially, we believe, happening because there is more development of single-family attached and multifamily housing happening in suburban developments than there used to be in the past. And just in general, I think the footprints for parcels is reduced a little bit than it has been in the past. And we'll see some charts to support that. Non-residential trends over time tend to be reflecting what's been happening on the economic landscape. We think about the recession in the late 2000s, and it also seems to reflect some growing changes in policy, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And lastly, as the region is growing, so are the parks. We tend to add more parkland over time. So, what does our region look like? Here's just a map, generalized map, and a little graphic showing the composition of the region. Each square on this graphic represents about 2% of the region. So when you look at the different types of general land uses, agricultural is, 28% of the region, and the undeveloped is another 20%. So it's about 48% of the whole region, what we would classify as underutilized. Now, I do not mean to say that agricultural land is not important. It is. But when we think about the expansion of the urban, those are the places where it tends to happen. But I think, as I said, this is slowing down. And so this is showing a shift in values, and we're trying to do more infill and increase redevelopment. As far as the urbanized uses, the yellow represents all residential. That's about 24% of the region. Non-residential, which is commercial, industrial, institutional, is another 8%. Parks is now up to about 12% of the region. Water stays steady at 3 or 6%. We're not adding a whole lot of water in the region. No surprise there. Though we have been, no denying. We've been dredging some sod fields up in Anoka area and adding lakes up there. And then transportation we have as 2%. Now keep in mind this represents airports, railroads and major highways only. It does not represent all roadways. We do not delineate the generalized land use down to roadways. When we do split the land uses, we're going to the street center line besides the major highways. So that gives you a general sense of what the region, makeup of the region. When we look at land use consumption rates, you can see there's definitely a decline since the 90s. Many more acres were being swallowed up in development back then than they are now. However, I would argue that it has been fairly, even though there's a little up and down in the last 4 land use inventories, it's fairly stable at about 5,000 acres per year since 2010, 2005. There's been a little up and down. We think some of that down between 2010 and 16 had a lot to do with that recession in the late 2000s, where we saw, according to Housing MinPost, like 70% of the region housing starts had dropped 70% in that time. And I think that's why we're seeing only 39,000 acres consumed in that second land use. There was a little bounce back and then it dropped again. So don't know if that's really a trend or not, but when you look at it throughout the 20-year cycle, it's fairly stable at about 5,000.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Jerry.
This doesn't apply for Carver County though, does it?
This is across the whole region.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it applies to part of it. I don't know if the whole thing.
Well, I think Carver County is the fastest growing county.
Oh,
So,
well, yeah, you may be taking more of those acres. Yes,
Right.
definitely. Yeah. So what is happening, what's being developed, when we look at the breakdown in general categories of housing, single family detached particularly, that's the dark blue, and the other residential and the other urbanized developments, you can see single family detached has been the big hungry thing in the room. It's taking about 2/3 of all development that's happening. Other residential, this is single family attached, so your townhouses and multifamily is another 11% in this last inventory. And commercial and other non-res industrial is another 26%. As you can see, between 2020 and 2025, it's been, the representation is very similar throughout the other years. But obviously the consumption is much further down than in the 90s. So where is this single family detached occurring? Well, no big surprise. It's in what we're calling the suburban edge communities. These are communities that have undeveloped land or agricultural land in their community. And this is communities that are planning for this growth. We are providing sewer service for these communities. We're providing some transit and other transportation needs. And so this is not unexpected. This is where we expect it to be. We are seeing a little bit of elevation in the rural res and the diversified rural. These communities can certainly grow. They have different constraints and policies associated with them. But when we look at the total land that's still available, say for rural res, there's still like 80,000 acres that is developable, if you want to think about it that way. I'm not saying it is, but so we're not going to be running out of land anytime soon to accommodate growth in the region. But we certainly want to continue to be efficient in how we're doing it. Just wanted to jump back to the land consumption. So we talked about acreage of development, but when we think about that land acreage and compare it to households, this is a graph showing you land consumption per 1,000 households in the region. And here again, you can see the dramatic drop in how we've been more efficient in our development of land, kind of putting a limitation on what we used to coin urban sprawl, which doesn't usually get talked about a whole lot anymore. But it's certainly going down the last 5 years. It's lower than it had been between 2010 and 2020. We'll see if the next 5 years continue that trend or not. But that's a good sign, I think, in terms of our policies and also in terms of what cities are needing for their own constituents. When we look at other residential, so this is single family attached, so your townhomes and duplexes, triplexes, and multifamily. Seeing a similar pattern where most of this development's happening in the suburban edge, but there is a significant amount in the suburban. The one interesting thing about this is, and this graph doesn't show it, is the comparison to the previous 5 years. For both suburban and suburban edge, minus the attached housing in the suburban, the amount of acres has doubled in this last 5 years than it had the previous 5 years. So a lot more is going in of these multifamily units in the suburban edge. This could be partially a reflection of the policies that are out there, but I think it's also just communities are starting to think about life cycle housing, thinking about the need. People want to age, raise their family and age in the community. And so communities are building more senior housing and providing more options, housing options in these communities. And it's reflective in what we saw. So.
I just wanted to observe on that one too, that in the urban and urban edge, the proportion that's multifamily is much more significant, which kind of makes sense just given the situation.
Yes, and I should also just remind you that this is undeveloped land, so this is not accommodating redevelopment. If we were to look at units in redevelopment, and this isn't units, this is acres, but you know, if you were to think about that, it is dramatically different. But yes, those communities in the urban are being more efficient, or they're not developing single family attached much in those communities.
And would it be, you have the 5 years ago data for the suburban and suburban edge, was the proportion of multifamily smaller of the overall total during that last period as well?
For the suburban it was, because the suburban doubled in size, like,
But
I don't know how many acres that is.
The proportion that's multifamily as opposed to the single family attached.
Yeah, I think 5 years ago, the single family attached was about the same amount of acres as we're seeing this year, or these last 5 years. But the multifamily has doubled, yeah. And for the suburban, they have both increased. So this is what, about 1,700 acres. We were, 800 acres last time. And they were proportionally about the same, but for that. So, what does this mean when we think about our policies? And so I tried to take this a little step further, and I don't know if this works. I think it does, but you'll tell me. So when we look at the urban and the urban edge communities, and we look at the last 3 inventories, looking solely at those lands that developed and associating them with building permit information, we're seeing that urban and urban edge communities, at least in the last 5 years, on average are meeting or succeeding the minimum density thresholds put in place by the policy guidelines. This does not mean that every city in these groupings is doing it, but the average is higher. So I think there's still room for some communities, or room for dialogue with some communities to do more or think about their options. But we are certainly seeing a general trend up in how much units per acre are being put into these communities. When we look at the suburban edge, and rural centers, we're seeing a similar pattern, at least in the suburban and suburban edge, where on average, communities in the last 5 years are meeting or exceeding the minimum threshold. And once again, this isn't all communities, but most, or I wouldn't even say most, it's just the average of them. Where in the rural centers, they're not. Now, I can't speak to why that is, but I can say that we are not seeing much development actually happening in those communities. It's more infill sort of development that's happening. And I don't know if that's what's driving it, or if there's some other, something else that's playing a role in it. But generally, we're just not seeing a whole lot of development in there. So.
Go ahead.
Just a question, do you just mean residential development or just any type of development?
Yeah, this is residential development that we're talking here, so we can identify units per acre, not any non-res at this point. When we think about non-res,
Go ahead, Jerry.
oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Could that be because a lot of these areas are already built up and there's no room to build?
For some of those smaller communities in Carver, definitely, but there are other communities that have orderly annexation agreements with surrounding townships. They have agreements where development can come in. Belle Plaine and Jordan and Scott County have that. And even Norwood Young America has an orderly annexation agreement, but you know, I think that's more that it's so far out that they're just not seeing the demand that the communities that are closer in. But yeah.
What I was referring to is, I mean, I don't get around too much, but Lakeville, Rosemount, Burnsville, it seems like every time I've gone through there, it's completely built up, so there's no room to build anymore.
Well,
That way, it's going down then, you know.
yeah, well, those communities are not rural centers, so that's not, they're under the suburban edge, and we are seeing growth, but they're still filling, even though they look maybe full, there's still pockets in there where there's still opportunity for growth. I think even Apple Valley is still got some large acreage that's undeveloped, but yeah. But ultimately, I think your point is eventually when they do get built up, you will see them drop, but they will turn more into those urban edge communities where there's just not as much new growth happening, but it'll be more in redevelopment opportunities for them. Any other questions on this over here? No?
And maybe I should just clarify the last comment, if I may. I forgot to ask for permission the first time. So when you said the last reference about sort of those communities may be more urban or urban edge, you didn't mean that they would change their designation or classification, but they'd be more like that because they didn't have the acreage to develop. So I just wanted to clarify that if anybody was nervous their community was suddenly going to be designated as urban, that's not what you were talking about.
Thank you for that clarification.
Thank you.
So non-residential acreage, a little different graph. Primarily, I just want to point out when we think about commercial, institutional, transportation, we're clearly seeing a trend downward in the number of acres needed to accommodate that growth. Maybe with commercial office, it's kind of stable. One thing that the people that I had help me with this year, observation that they had is a lot of mini storage facilities going in all over the region. Now, whether that's new development or redevelopment, I don't know, but that could be playing a role. But also, when we just think about expansion of the region, if you're developing a new suburban community, it's not just housing. We need commercial space in there too. Gas stations or convenience stores or grocery stores. So we are going to continue to have some growth in commercial and office, clearly, through that. But yeah, the others, they're going down. Non-res mixed use, it's a very small amount, and this is primarily just more about terminology. When we think about for the land use inventory and mixed use, this is primarily, for the way that we're defining it, it's primarily multiple uses in a vertical way. So multiple uses on a single property. So it may be the corner store with the mom and pop shop in the main floor and apartments above it, or it could be an office building that has, some commercial space. But some communities think about mixed use more in a horizontal way, right? This is a neighborhood that's mixed use, and there could be multiple single use ideas going on there. For how we delineate the land use, since we're doing it primarily at the parcel level, we don't categorize mixed use that way. So just keep in mind, that's why it's so small. It's kind of a definition here. The other point on this slide is the industrial. That clearly is going the opposite direction that we're seeing some of these other land uses. There was a big drop in 2005 to 10. That could have been part of the recession, I don't know, but it's been slowly going up. Anyone that paid attention to this presentation 5 years ago, a big increase in between 2016 and 2020 was the development of solar arrays or solar farms out in the rural areas. And that constituted a lot of that growth in those areas. This time around, it is also constituting some of it. There is also the large warehouses that we all hear about in the news. But a lot of what we're seeing in the acreage is still the solar arrays. One example that I just wanted to talk about is down by the Flint Resources down in Rosemont, the big oil refinery. They have added over 350 acres of solar around on their property. That could be a shift in their perspective of where the world is going, but it is also probably a reflection of state level goals and policies related to zero emissions. And so they're compensating for what they're putting out there by adding all this solar around there. Good or bad, I'm not gonna judge that, but it's an interesting observation of what's going on. Some of the on their own solar arrays out in the more of the agricultural lands are not, there weren't as many as there were the 5 years before that. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, since you brought up like storage, what is that categorized as for
I'm
land
sorry.
use? Storage?
Oh, the mini storage?
Mhm.
That would be under commercial.
Oh, still under commercial?
Yeah.
And then what about the solar farms?
That we put under the industrial. So
Okay.
that's why the industrial is increasing.
Okay, and then what about like, you mentioned the warehouses, like what about data centers too?
Well, the data centers, if we've been able to identify them, we lump them in with the industrial. I will say that the light industrial flex development, I don't know if you were interested in that, or you're just really interested in the
yeah.
data center.
I just don't know what it would be categorized, and also if it comes down to like local jurisdictions to categorize them, because, you know, I'm just seeing conversations happen across different communities and how they talk about the data centers. And also
Yeah.
if there's guidance from the Met Council about how you would categorize that.
Yeah, and I cannot, comfortably speak to the council's perspective on it. I'll leave that for Angela if she wants to tackle it. But I did do a search and look for data centers through the building permits, because in theory, they will identify that in the building permits. There weren't that many, surprisingly. It was like less than a dozen. And when I looked at them, we had classified them all in industrial. So that's just our way of doing it. And when we release this information, we write up the metadata and explain what goes into these things. But you're probably absolutely right that a city themselves may think about them differently. But that's kind of one of the reasons why we do our own inventory, is then we can make sure that we have at least a comparison. We may not call it what you would want to call it, but it's at least consistent across the region.
Go ahead.
Thanks. So I want to go back to the beginning of the presentation when you said you were not, I want to just clarify, make sure I understand this, you're not using zoning or land use regulation in defining these things. These are your own definitions. So you're not saying like a data center would be guided industrial, for instance. You're just saying this is how we categorize it.
Correct.
Thank you.
We did look at the assessor's information to help guide us on what we would want to call it, but yeah, we did not use it directly. Yeah, so that's the non-res. So parks, near and dear to most everyone's heart. It always comes up high on what we love about the region. As we've seen in every inventory, it continually grows. This is not just regional parks that the council is involved in. This is actually at the local level too. As I mentioned about with the commercial, as we develop neighborhoods, we want to make sure we have playgrounds, we have walking paths, we have other things, amenities for our residents that are going into these new facilities. So it's not unreasonable to think that this is going to go up. Golf courses continue to do a slight decline. You can't really notice it here, but we are seeing, still some golf courses closing. The acreage was I don't have the number, but it was a little less than it has been in years past. And typically when they close, they go into residential. There's housing. Sometimes these are in communities that are fully developed already, and this is land opportunity for them to provide some more housing and usually a little bit of recreation with that, so. So just to recap, yeah, we're generally seeing that the land consumption rates through our inventory have been fairly stable since 2005. Residential detached is still the main driver across the region and will continue. We are seeing increases in attached housing and multifamily in the suburban communities, which probably is a reflection of policy, but also just cities' own needs for supporting life cycle housing or any other initiatives that they have. And the overall density then is also increasing over time. Non-residential seems to be primarily reflecting economic trends, whether it's new development or whether it was a kind of a clamp down from a recession, and the policies that we're seeing with the emissions changes that are happening. And our parks are continuing to be a growth area in our region, as I think we all would like to see. So.
Go ahead, Christos.
Sure, Chair. So I'm wondering, as you track this over time, are you also tracking like inflation adjusted cost for detached residential, from 2000 until now, also multi-use, and just, how that might factor into the trends that you're seeing?
That's a great point. I have not been looked at costs associated to these, but that would be an interesting, analysis if that's playing a role in it, right? This is primarily just looking at the observation at this point of what we're seeing. Yeah, that's a good thing.
Right.
I was wondering, you had mentioned that there's some cities that may do their own existing land use surveys and maybe do it more frequently. Is it a significant enough number of cities where that might be helpful to the Met Council to track on that or use that as part of this process? Or could you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I don't have a good number on that. I just know that when I've looked through comp plans, I can tell which ones are our maps versus cities' maps. And whether they're actually tracking it or whether it was just a one-time thing with a different schema that fits for them, I'm not sure. There has been a lot of discussion in the past about whether we should, wouldn't it be easier just to get it from the cities? And in theory, it sounds good, but when we look at, unless there is a required schema that everyone uses, then we're spending a lot of time trying to determine, well, is this the same as that and this, and we almost probably spend the same amount of time sifting through that. But there may be value in tracking it, and there has been ideas in the past where, okay, we do it every 5 years. Could we create another product that kind of helps us get to the next year? Like leverage assessor information, building permits, maybe a community's information to build kind of a pseudo intermittent inventory data set. It was entertained about 20 years ago and it never went anywhere with that. No one asked this, but I just asking your question. In the past, a lot of people have asked about just using machine learning for this, and I did want to just kind of touch on that because if you don't ask it, someone will at the next meeting. We have, there's been a lot of people are like, well, can we use AI to do this? And one could do that. It would be a completely different product than what we've been doing in the past. Once again, AI is looking at imagery and it can say, okay, this is showing this color reflectance and we can tell it to call it this or that. But for consistency, you would have so much variation from year to year that we would do it, that we would spend a lot of time just trying to fix it or train the machine to do it. So it isn't necessarily as easy as people have thought it would be. With that said, I think in the next 5 years, there will be people on the council or council staff that will entertain that idea, just to kind of put it to rest, or see if there's, at some level, we can integrate it, and then, or at least give us an idea of where change might be more prevalent than others, and then, go in and take a little more time and break that apart, so.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
One thing that caught my eye back on page 7 under transportation, you got the trends fading down, but doesn't that have a lot to do with state policy? Here in Minnesota, my understanding is they're trying to get more green energy, more mass transit or something, than in order to build new roads, they make you jump through so many hoops. A lot of them are just saying that, well, the heck with it. I mean, isn't that one reason why that transportation is going way down? Because the state doesn't want them, or is that just?
I can't address that. I mean, I'm not involved in those discussions. I mean, you could be right.
Neither am I.
I think more it's that what we're classifying as transportation, as I said at the beginning, it's primarily just the airports, the railroads, which are stable, and the airports are fairly stable in their land use. And then major highways.
Yeah.
So the only way it would really increase is if there's a new highway put in, and we haven't had that many lately.
Right.
It does include, I will say it does include light rail. So when the green line has gone in, like this last time, a lot of that acreage is probably associated with the green line extension going in. And if the blue line ever continues, then we'll have an increase there too. So it does include the light rail, and that's probably most of that acreage for 2020 and 2025.
What, is the green line the one that starts out in Eden Prairie there?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
green line.
yeah.
That's the extension.
Go ahead.
A couple of questions. One that I just thought of with the last question with transportation, does that cover everything like associated with the highway? Like if you have a large stormwater pond for the highway, is that included in the transportation acreage?
If it's owned by, the general response would be if it's owned by the highway, like it's highway owned land, we would include that if it's adjacent to the highway.
Okay.
If it's like a multimodal switch yard of a railway, we'll include that, and if it's a parking lot for a light rail station, we include that. It does not include maybe something else like some office building or something that's not adjacent to it.
Yep, okay, that makes sense. The other question I had, you mentioned something earlier about the growth only in the urban and urban edge area only reflecting like open space to fully developed growth, was that right? And I was just curious, when you gave the residential density trend, does that not reflect redevelopment at all, or like?
It does not reflect redevelopment.
Huh,
So if you include a redevelopment, it's even higher.
okay, because I would think a lot of the growth in the urban zone is tearing down single family homes for apartments.
Yeah, I
similar.
initially did it including all building permits, and I think it was like over 100 units per acre in the urban.
Oh.
Yeah.
I will also just say, and this is really just a comment, slide 9, the less acreage needed to support growth, that was really heartening to me, because sometimes I'll drive through Rosemount or Lakeville and I'll see all these farm fields just becoming more asphalt roads and single family homes, and I feel like, oh, we're losing the elegant sprawl, but no, we're like less than half of an acre per household, or less than a half acreage per household.
Yeah, when I look at this, I kind of like to go back to 1990 and see what was going on in terms of where this development was happening. I mean, we could probably do that and figure it out, but
Yeah.
I should also say it could be also a refinement in how we're doing the inventory itself. Back in 1990, we were using big aerial photos and Mylar sheets with crayons and circling things. Where now we have really fine resolution, 1 foot imagery, we have parcel data. So we are maybe making improvements, and that's playing a lot to this.
Don't take my good news away from me.
Well, I think it's still good news. We're certainly not accommodating, 550 of those acres, but I think we are being more efficient in our growth, yes.
Any other questions for Paul?
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious, given this discussion and what we were talking about in our last session about particularly having a large acreage lot and having a home on one part of the lot and having the rest sort of wide open, and you see that kind of in the far western suburbs of Minneapolis some too, as you get out into towards Lake Minnetonka. There's some very big properties and just one home. But when policies started to change for the Met Council to really try to minimize that, and as we were talking about last time, trying to make sure that you've got enough development within a particular part of that parcel. And if that had an impact then on what you're seeing this trend line too,
I don't think it's having an impact on the trend line, because we've kind of done that the way we've delineated
And then
it.
with the land consumption, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, I think it's more due to the quality of the information than
Okay.
what you're suggesting. It could be a little of that, but I think it's mostly just finer quality of information that we have. And I was gonna say something else about your comment and those large lots, but I'll leave it at that, so.
Any other questions for Paul?
All right, well,
Thank you, Paul.
If you have any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to me and we can talk offline.
Thank you. Up next, we've got TOD policy update, Michael Krantz.
Chair, committee members, good afternoon. I'm Michael Krantz. I'm the Senior Manager of Transit-Oriented Development for Metro Transit. And the slides that I'm going to prepare or have prepared to share with you are really just briefing you on a project that we're working on to update the council's TOD policy. So I'm going to put the slides down. There we go. All right. So to begin, I'm just going to provide a little bit of background on the current TOD policy, how we developed that policy, what it establishes in terms of goals and strategies for the council. I'm going to provide a little bit of overview on the need and the process that we're going through to update this policy, review some of the engagement work that we've done to help guide that work, and then also seek your feedback on the engagement themes, what's resonating, what's missing, to get some direction on where we go from here. So to take a far step back, when I'm talking about transit-oriented development, what we're really talking about is medium to high density development in a neighborhood with a mix of uses served by frequent transit and pedestrian-friendly streets. And the reason that matters is when you align this sort of land use with transit, you see a lot of benefits, a lot of which align with the council's goals. The top there is building ridership, and that's the reason a lot of transit agencies are really focused on TOD, but there are a lot of other benefits as well. It helps, there's a lot of research showing that it can help mitigate climate change, help preserve natural habitat, help advance goals related to equity, improve safety outcomes, support the fiscal sustainability of communities where that development's happening, as well as improve health outcomes. So there are a lot of benefits, and I'll just take a quick step back. I've got a lot of slides that I'm going to step through. I do have some discussion questions at the end. If you have questions as I'm going through this, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to answer those. So just stop me if I'm going too quickly. So going to the ridership piece, I think this is a really important part to understand. I'm going to discuss this in the framing that the University of Minnesota Accessibility Observatory uses. So they really talk about this in terms of transit accessibility. And they define transit accessibility as the ease with which someone can access the destination that they're trying to get to. And there are really two parts to that. There's the quality of the transit service, and then there's also the destination density. And those two, when you combine those, that really contributes to transit ridership. So the service quality piece, that really comes down to the speed that the buses and trains are operating along the corridor, the frequency, how often those buses are coming, how long somebody has to wait for a bus or a train to arrive, the reliability of that service, as well as the route. This is what most transit agencies focus on. These are the levers that they can pull to deliver good transit service. But just as important to transit accessibility is the quality of the development around that transit service. It's the density of uses, the mixture of uses, the quality of the pedestrian and bicycle environment, how easy is it for folks to get to those destinations. Diving into the details, can you access a grocery store? How easily can you get to your job along that transit service? That is just as important to good transit accessibility as the quality of the transit service. So when we're talking about transit accessibility, the TOD side is really focused on the right side of that equation. And this is just some of the research related to that. How does land use contribute to ridership? So the chart on the left, fairly dense, it's showing on the x-axis the density of jobs and population near various transit systems and how that contributes to ridership. So the y-axis is a ridership, and you see generally as the density of jobs and housing increases, you see an increase in ridership. On the right, what that shows is a related graph, but really focused on vehicle miles traveled. So as you see household residential increase, you see a pretty significant decline in average household VMT based on that density. So these are just general rules, but it kind of shows the relationship between land use and transportation. And in this case, what we're really looking at is the transit ridership piece. So I think an important part of this is why the Met Council. I talked about this in terms of the council goals and how TOD aligns with the council goals, but there's also, I want to focus here on why the council, given its structure, is involved in TOD. And I want to talk about this in terms of the various hats that the council wears. The first is as a transit provider. And when we look across the country, it's really you see a lot of transit providers that are engaged in TOD because, one, it helps contribute to ridership, and two, they often own land in station areas that can support TOD near their service. There's the regional planning perspective. So the Metropolitan Council serves as the transportation MPO, and again, when you look across the country, there are a lot of MPOs that have TOD programs. They're more focused on the planning side of that, providing resources and supporting good planning practices around transit. But then the council also has unique land use authorities, which I think really aligns well with TOD, as well as operating a housing and redevelopment authority. And those combined put the council in a unique position to help support TOD in the region. So the original TOD policy was adopted back in 2013. I'll just provide a little bit of background on why that happened then. At the time, we were operating the blue line and the red line, and the Metro Green line was a year away from operation. I'll actually note that Executive Director Brauhaus was really instrumental in helping to adopt the TOD policy at the time. And it was really focused on, particularly around the Metro Green line, a lot of the work to help align land use near that transit investment. Since 2013, we've pretty significantly expanded the extent of the metro system in the Twin Cities. We've added extensively both to the light rail system, but also to the BRT system, and we've made significant improvements in the frequency and extent of transit service through the region. And as that's built out, it's increased the importance of developing effective TOD around this transit system. So I want to pause and just talk a little bit about what the current TOD policy says before I move into the work that we're doing to update this policy. So the current TOD policy has 4 goals for the council's TOD work. The first goal is to maximize the development impact of these transit investments, and that's really focused around integrating the transportation system with jobs and housing. The second goal is to support regional economic competitiveness by leveraging private investment near those public transit investments. The third goal is to advance equity by improving multimodal access to opportunity for everyone. And the fourth goal is to support a 21st century transportation system by increasing ridership on that transit system, but also by generating revenue for the transit system and leveraging the land and assets and the value of that transit investment. The policy also establishes strategies for advancing those goals. So the first strategy is, and when I talk about this, we typically group it into 3 buckets, but I'll provide a little bit more detail on what the policy says, what the actual language says. The first strategy is to advance projects on council-owned land near these transit investments. The second strategy is to share resources with partners to help them advance their TOD goals, and I'll share some examples of that. And then also to coordinate both within the council, but also with external partners. We're always working with a variety of partners to help advance these projects. So these are the actual strategies. There are 5 strategies. There's some more on the subsequent slide, but I just want to highlight a couple key pieces of this because it really kind of illustrates why we're looking at the TOD policy update right now. So part of the goal within prioritized resources is to prioritize TOD in the development of council-owned land and facilities, and then to pursue private sector and local government partnerships to accelerate development and land acquisition for TOD. So a significant project focus with that. Some additional strategies include engaging with community and private sector stakeholders in TOD and joint development activities, leading on specific council-led projects, and then supporting stationary planning. So those are the strategies that are identified in the TOD policy today to guide us in advancing the goals of the policy. Just briefly, to show some of the work that we've been doing, these are some of the resources that we have related to TOD on our website. We track where development is happening in the region. We track how much of that's happening within our transit ways. Some of the statistics that we update this on an annual basis, so you can really dig into this. You can filter it by city or transit way on the website if you're interested. But some of the high-level statistics are that we've seen just shy of 70,000 new homes built near our transit ways going back to 2009, which is the earliest data that we have available. And this is somewhat related to the presentation that was just previously given on land use, but what we've tracked is over 40% of multifamily and commercial development in the region has been permitted within a half a mile of our metro transit system, which represents just about 3% of the region by land area. So a really significant concentration of development near these transit ways, again, going back to 2009. We also have a public parcel map, which looks at where there's publicly owned land throughout the region. And this is to help identify partnership opportunities, potential affordable housing opportunities, but this is publicly available on our website. And those are 2 of the resources that get used quite a bit, but we have other resources on there if you're interested. Now I want to shift to the project focus, since that is really a large part of the original policy. This map shows where the council owns land near our transit stations, where there may be some amount of development potential, and where it's close to existing transit service. So there are just over 30 sites throughout the region. And this is a lot of the work in my office is really focused on advancing some sort of redevelopment opportunity on those sites. And this is a council-approved list of sites, so it helps us focus our attention. We can't work on all of those sites at the same time, obviously. So these are the sites that we're currently working on, where we've got a partnership with the city, but also we've received some level of development interest in that site. So council recently took action on Shady Oak, where we're working on a joint powers agreement with the city of Hopkins to help advance a redevelopment there and help them move forward with those goals. So I expect Helmo Avenue Station, which is in the city of Oakdale along the Gold Line, will be following shortly after that. We also have a developer on board with Central Station Block. So just to give a sense of some of the work that we're doing on these projects, but we really do have projects throughout, across our system.
Just very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going to the Maplewood Mall Transit Center, can you go a little bit more about just those areas that you're talking about for redevelopment? And why Maplewood wouldn't fit in that
Sure.
Maplewood Transit Center?
Yeah, so each of these sites represent areas where the council owns the land, where it's large enough to support some level of development. And that's really kind of the base of work that we've done at this point. Unless it's one of the red circled sites, we haven't gotten to the point of actually having conversations with the communities about what sort of redevelopment they want to see there, or reaching out to the development community to see what might be feasible to develop there. But there is some level of potential, and having this map says we can begin to ask some of those questions and use some of our resources to figure out if something can happen there. So that's not one of the projects where we've done as much work at this point.
Okay, yeah, I only mentioned that too because as you know, it's part of the Bronze Line, and then it's also one of the larger areas where it is very, like, from a land use perspective, it's underutilized, right? It's a lot of parking, there's a mall, but it's not, compare that to Rosedale Mall, right? That amount of development is not occurring.
Sure.
Yeah, and then also just geographically for your consideration is like that northern part too, and part of the area there in the metro is important.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Yeah, that's a great comment. And we actually do have exhibits for all of these sites that we have posted on our website, and I'm happy to share that with you if you're interested. It shows what the limits of the council parcel are, so you can see that within the context of the mall, if you're interested. So again, I just wanted to illustrate one of the projects that we're working on, since this is the one where we've seen the most recent action. The areas outlined in black are redevelopment opportunities on land that the council owns. This was acquired for the Metro Green Line extension. And again, we've been working really closely with the city of Hopkins to kind of understand what their vision for redevelopment is there, develop a joint powers agreement so we can move forward with a request for developer proposals and ultimately deliver what their vision is, which is multifamily with a small component of commercial on that site. So that's just an example of how we work with partners to move those projects forward. This is a particularly large site. And their vision for this area is much more ambitious. This is just kind of the first phase of that. So why update the TOD policy now? I think there are several reasons. The first policy was really adopted in line with Thrive 2040. So with Imagine 2050, we want to make sure that the TOD policy is aligned with the goals and policies in that document, as well as with the goals of Metro Transit Forward. The state of the practice in TOD continues to evolve. There are the best practices across the country. There are a lot of agencies that are doing this work, and we want to make sure that we're continuing to leverage those best practices. We have a lot more experience in the TOD office doing this work, and I think we want to make sure that the TOD policy is reflective of what we've learned trying to advance these projects. As I pointed out before, we've made a substantial investment in transit, and there's a lot more opportunity to work on and advance TOD. We are hoping to get clear direction on how we advance projects on council-owned property specifically, which is why I highlighted those elements of the strategy. And we want to create a little bit more definition within the TOD policy on how our office can support cities and communities who want to advance their own projects in TOD work. So for all of those reasons, that's really what's driving the effort to update the TOD policy now. So just to give a couple examples, these are some of the policies in Imagine 2050 that are related to TOD. This is by no means a comprehensive list. We did pull together a crosswalk, all of the Imagine 2050 policies that are related to TOD. But just as an example, one of the policies is focus local level growth near high frequency transit service in station areas to leverage infrastructure investments, support transit ridership, and encourage compact and vibrant mixed-use walkable areas. That's TOD in a nutshell. And there are a lot of these policies within Imagine 2050 that really guide us to do this work. And we want to make sure that the TOD policy is reflective of and building on all of that work. So we're not reinventing the wheel, and we're consistent with that policy. I'm going to shift very briefly to just some of the areas that TOD agencies or TOD groups are working on within transit agencies. I should have mentioned that we also have some consultants with SRF on board that are really helping us with this work. That includes staff with a lot of expertise working on TOD programs across the country. We also have Yona Freemark, who help do a lot of research with transit agencies and MPOs across the country to understand what are they doing with their TOD programs, what are some of the lessons that we want to build upon, and I've got some slides related to that at the end. But some of the areas that TOD programs are focused on include informing how transit is sited and designed to support TOD. How do we facilitate TOD on agency-owned property? And I've spoken about that quite a bit already. Collaborating on station area planning, planning and facilitating better station access, and then funding TOD planning, infrastructure and/or projects. So these are just some of the areas that TOD programs focus on. And then I just wanted to highlight some of the goals that these agencies have with their TOD work. So creating better transit connectivity, which is going back to the transit accessibility slides that I shared previously, getting higher density near transit stations, improving pedestrian access, both the safety and the comfort of pedestrians, reducing auto orientation, improving equitable outcomes, providing better access to retail and services, improving the diversity and affordability of housing in station areas, providing better first last mile connections, better environmental sustainability in public spaces, and those connect back to some of the why TOD matters to the council previously. So I want to show where we are in the process before I move into the next phase of the presentation. So last night we actually presented to the committee of the whole, talking about some of the feedback of the engagement that we got through this process, because that was a really important part of this. The first phase was really understanding what do our policy documents guide with respect to TOD, and then we went through a really extensive stakeholder and peer engagement process to understand what we need to try to solve for through the TOD policy work. Right now we're moving into the synthesis and recommendation phase, and then based on the feedback that we get, we will begin developing recommendations for the next TOD policy. The goal is to have an updated TOD policy by the end of the year. So the consultants conducted a really extensive amount of engagement, reaching out to 25 plus groups through this process, including many external and internal partners that included council leadership. We have an internal steering committee within the council with groups from across Metropolitan or Metro Transit, community development, MTS to help inform that work. But we also reached out to a lot of local city and county staff, nonprofit and for-profit development parties, as well as peer agencies. Now, when I go through the stakeholder engagement, I'm going to keep that separate from the lessons that we learned from peer agencies, just for clarity. But all of that was part of our broader stakeholder engagement work. So now I'm going to shift into the themes. This is the area where I'm really hoping that we can have some conversation about what's resonating, where are there gaps as we go through this. And this was, again, based on the interviews that we conducted with our stakeholders, with cities, counties, and our development partners, as well as with internal staff. So the way we've structured this is we'll have 2 slides for each theme, just kind of summarizing what we heard, providing some of the quotes that we heard from the stakeholders, just some of their representative observations. So I'll go through these and then provide some of the peer agency lessons, and then we can have some discussion on the questions. So the first theme that we heard is that we really need to align council and city goals project by project. So upfront, when we're identifying an area for development, we need to make sure we're really clear on what community goals are for development on that site, and that we're working to align the vision for development at the very beginning. So this was a significant, we heard a lot of feedback on that. So stakeholders were emphasizing the importance of collaboration between the council, Metro Transit, and local governments, especially given city land use authorities with this work. Stakeholders brought a wide range of perspectives towards these partnerships and what they wanted in terms of development outcomes. And it's really important for the TOD policy to anticipate and respond to that. So some of the quotes that support those findings, and again, this is just a sample of those. We had a lot of conversations. We aren't able to share all of that here. But some of the broader quotes are, some cities will be receptive to these partnerships and others may not. Some cities may trust the Met Council and others don't. So we want to make sure that the policy is really being flexible with the property and partner context when we're working on projects. Another quote was, every project goal must be a shared goal with the community and with the development. We shouldn't try to force housing into an area where the community sees economic development. So that's really the first theme. The second theme was to strengthen municipal partnerships. And I'll just highlight that none of these themes are really mutually exclusive. A lot of them are related. This is very closely tied to the prior theme and some of the subsequent themes as well. But we just want to highlight some of the key pieces. So this theme is really interest in ongoing engagement and developing at least a semi-standardized process to help coordinate the process of moving through the development process would be really important. I think at a high level, what we heard is communities where we're working on projects want to be involved from the beginning and throughout that process to have a seat at the table and help guide it as it moves forward. Some of the observations that we heard is TOD is most successful when it is done in partnership. Cities want to understand the expectations early and be involved throughout the process. So just a couple samples there. The third theme was to build an internal framework for consistent TOD delivery. Some of the comments that we heard are that stakeholders generally support TOD goals, but identify challenges related to implementation. So I think this is really related to somewhat to the internal process that we go through to advance projects, making sure that we're clear on when and how all of the partners are involved, how decisions are being made as we move those projects forward, so that there's not uncertainty or ambiguity about who's involved and when those decisions are being made. Some of the representative observations is that the vision's clear, but implementation is a challenge, and that's something we really need to focus on. We need to pre-plan sites for TOD development as long as the transit station, is being sited to help maximize that development. So that's really focused on making sure, as we're building out the transit improvements, that we're thinking about the development up front. And I think we just heard a lot of comments about making sure that we're clear and consistent in what that process needs to be. The fourth theme is that we should calibrate the council's role to community capacity. And of all the themes, I think we heard the most around this particular theme. I think this is somewhat related, but cities expressed interest in earlier and more sustained engagement throughout TOD planning and implementation, and stakeholders emphasize the importance of flexibility to respond to local context, market conditions, and community priorities. But I want to focus in on some of the observations which I think capture it quite well. So the council should tailor its role based on local capacity. So support strong cities, partner with those balancing priorities, and take a more hands-on approach where capacity is limited, while ensuring consistent and equitable outcomes across the region. And I think the key point here is we own sites throughout the region where there is some amount of TOD potential. Some cities have a lot of staff and resources and capacity and expertise to help advance those projects. Some may have less. And we should adjust our roles to meet those needs. If a city wants to take the lead and has the capacity to do that, we should kind of take a step back and let them run with that process. If they need more support on those projects, that's an area for us to step in and provide more support to help them advance their vision for that redevelopment. Sorry, was there a question? Okay, I thought I might have seen a hand. Okay.
I've got something to say, but I'll wait till you're done.
All right, sounds good. All right, the fifth theme is to clarify equity and anti-displacement goals and articulate and scale tools to achieve them. So the current TOD policy does have a general statement about equity, but it doesn't provide much clarity on how we're actually going to achieve equity through TOD projects. And I think we want to make sure that we provide a little bit more clarity through the TOD policy work. It's also silent on anti-displacement, and there's been a lot of work that the council's done around this, and we want to make sure that we're building on that work through this update and building on it. So the sixth theme is to clarify the tools that the council brings to each TOD role. And again, this is really closely related to the calibrate the council role to community capacity, just making sure that when we're working on projects, we're clear about what the council can do, what tools we can bring to the table to help move those projects forward. Some of the observations, some of the questions that were raised, what is the council role on these projects, facilitator, partner, or implementer? There is broad support for TOD goals, but less agreement on how active the council should be in achieving those goals. And then the council should calibrate its role by adopting a tiered capacity-based support model that differentiates between mentorship, partnership, and direct intervention. Again, this is just kind of showing that overlap between these themes. All right, so those are the themes. I want to provide a couple slides on where council maybe is to an extent limited in its ability to address these themes based on its existing authorities, and then I'll just share a couple of the peer agency lessons, and I want to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. So just the three high-level points I want to make is that the council can only exercise powers expressly granted in statute. HRA powers, or Housing and Redevelopment Authority powers, are the council's only development-related authorities, and there are some constraints around that. And then there are also sometimes additional constraints that we run into based on the dollars that we received to buy property and then improve that property. So even if we have the authority to do something in general, there may be additional funding constraints on what we can do with a particular site. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify, in this Venn diagram that you were, or maybe you're not there yet, sorry, HRA versus TOD projects, am I ahead of you?
That will be the next slide.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's
I
fine.
apologize.
It's
I
related.
thought I was tracking with you.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
All right.
You're probably gonna
I
tell me
will.
what it is.
So that's where I was going next. So this is just meant to illustrate how projects that are enabled by HRA authorities relate to TOD. So the council has expressed authorities within the area of red and orange. So we have authorities that support working on these kinds of projects. TOD overlaps with that. Affordable housing projects, redevelopment projects fall within that orange category, but not all TOD projects fall within that. So some fall within this yellow thumbnail area. And when those projects fall in that area, we need to have a joint powers agreement or to work on that project, really. We really need that city to use their often economic development authorities to advance that project. And that's how we've worked with the city of St. Paul on Allianz Field and Central Station Block, and then also how we're working with the city of Hopkins on Shady Oak Station. That's getting a little bit into the weeds, but just to illustrate that there are some limits to what we can do with TOD.
And now I'll ask you a question. Is it safe to say that that orange space is kind of your sweet spot? I mean, you have site control, it's TOD. And are you leveraging the HRA's powers to execute those sites in terms of development? Is that
So actually, none of our projects have fallen in that orange area.
Oh,
I think
really?
the challenge that we run into is it's clear for affordable housing particularly. That's where those authorities are most aligned. But anytime we start adding mixed use components to that, or it's a commercial project, in order to fall within that orange area, it would have to be to prevent or remove flight. And that's a tough case to make. So that's the challenge that we run into. So we're often in that yellow area, which means that we're executing joint powers agreements with our partners so that they can advance that goal on our behalf.
So I have one follow-up question, Chair. So I'm kind of posing a question here that I don't expect you to answer. It's a little more rhetorical, but wouldn't it be safe to say that if the council and the state is making significant investments in those TOD areas in terms of the actual transit, that the prioritization for development should be those areas? And that we should, this is just rhetorical, that we should legislatively make those sites more productive in terms of how we're leveraging that transit asset. That's just a rhetorical question slash comment. Because I know from my experience that if you are limited in terms of the blight test, those will not happen, and yet those are some of the most interesting and most important opportunities as we look at the system as a whole. I'm just putting that into the room, thank you.
Thank you. So I didn't want to get too far into the weeds to this, but I think the important point that I want to make here is that some of the things that we heard, particularly when we want to align with city goals, when we're calibrating to community capacity, when we're providing more clarity on the tools that we can bring to the table, there are some limitations, and those can cause some frustrations. If we're trying to help a community advance a mixed-use project or a commercial project, and they have limited staff to work on that project or limited resources to work on that project, we can't step in and help with that because of the limits of these authorities. So I think that's kind of the high-level point that we're making with this slide. So I just want to briefly highlight 3 of the lessons that we heard from peer agencies, and again, we have a whole report on this, but I think these are some helpful things that we're kind of chewing through as we think about the TOD policy update. But one of the lessons is that goals at the portfolio scale where you're looking at all of the land and assets that you own, particularly when they're related to housing protection or affordability or ridership, can really help drive decision-making around those projects and move them forward faster. So some of the examples that we have, these are all West Coast examples, but there are examples from elsewhere across the country. LA Metro, BART, and BTA have all established pretty aggressive goals around how much housing they want to deliver on their sites, how much affordable housing they want to be included within those projects. And it's really helped them deliver a lot of projects near their transit systems. Another lesson is that strategic site management improves implementation. So rather than pursuing every opportunity, several agencies have developed ways to prioritize those sites to understand where they want to focus their attention, where are the most promising, highest impact opportunities that they can move projects forward on. And then the final lesson is that partnerships and planning create project readiness. And some of the examples that they saw are transit agencies working with communities, but at the very beginning when they've identified where they own land to say, okay, let's work together to figure out what the vision is for that. Where do we need better infrastructure or connections to this transit area? What policies need to be updated to help advance those projects? And that kind of sets the foundation for moving forward with that project down the road. And that seems to have been really successful for the agencies that have done that work. So that was a lot of information. I went through that pretty quickly. I wanted to set aside some time, and I'm happy to go back to any of these slides if you have questions or comments on those. But I just wanted to have some time to get feedback, particularly on the stakeholder engagement themes that we heard. So I have 3 questions that we can step through. I'll just start with the first. Are these themes and the peer agency themes consistent with or different than what you expected? Are there any pieces that are missing?
Go ahead, Jerry.
Mr. Chair. I think you are very good at what you do. You seem very knowledgeable. However, where I come from, we see the light rail system as a complete boondoggle. The North Star line is pretty much shut down because of low ridership. Green Line is 300% over budget, 5 years already behind schedule. Ridership in general is very low. Now, I understand you're trying to build another line through North Minneapolis to connect with the North Star line. So my questions are these, I got about 3 of them. How do you expect builders to want to build next to light rail systems when they look back at the progress of the Green Line and say, well, you know, we can't do it. We have to have more consistency in delivery here, product. 2, my understanding is a lot of the stations on the Blue Line, I believe it is, they're filthy dirty, the toilets are plugged always, there's graffiti everywhere. People don't feel safe. Why should they ride the light rail system? And 3, I'm not exactly sure where you are compared to the Met Council. I come from the country, you see. However, it seems to me, with all this stuff you just gave me to look at, maybe you need to kind of look and maybe change the way you're doing things so you have a better result. Because I'm not against don't get me, I'm not against light rail. I believe the concept is real and good. But I think the implementation of it so far has been very poor. And so how to make it more successful, I think you need to look at your fancy words here and stuff and come up maybe with a better system or a better look at things to make it better. I mean, you see, because eventually it's taxpayers who are paying the cost. So what are we getting for our money? And so I think you'd have better success with it if you maybe change the way you're doing. I'm not sure, I'm no expert. And maybe you need to kind of change things the way you're doing it so you get better results here. And maybe then more people would ride it, which moves more revenue, or you have more money to spend fixing or doing this or that. I'd like to hear your answer.
Sure. Thank you for those comments and questions. I think one of the reasons that we're focused on TOD is to answer some of the issues that you're raising in terms of transit ridership and the success of the lines, because I think going back to some of the slides that we were sharing earlier, a big part of what drives the success of the transit system is how many people can live and work and get to grocery stores and get to services and get to their destinations conveniently along that system. And while that transit system continues to operate, I think one of the things that we track in our office is, are developers building new housing there? Are they building new job opportunities? Where are we seeing new grocery stores and healthcare services? Where are those located throughout the region? Are we seeing more of those developments happen near our transit waste systems? And I think the reason we track that is because that's partly what determines how well, how much ridership we're going to generate and how successful the transit system is going to be. Some of what we've seen is that going back to, I think, 2009, we've seen, blanking on the numbers, over 20,000 new homes have been built near the Metro Green Line. We've seen, I think, $4 billion in multifamily development, over $4 billion in commercial developments. We've seen a lot of development, but I think when you look at that chart, that's really how much the density of jobs and housing, well, it's a kind of a coarse measure. It's a really important part of what determines the transit ridership that we're going to see. It's a big land use piece.
Right.
As somebody who lives 4 blocks from the Green Line, I want to note that neighborhoods like mine are heavily dependent on transit. About 40 to 50% of homeowners and renters within the Green Line area do not own a car. And so I think this is certainly with respect to your observations, I think it may be different in Carver County than it is here in close in. I also just want to ask a question about land use guidance adjacent to transit investments and how those are being leveraged more adequately from an economic perspective. So, and I think Jerry makes a really good point. We're spending a lot of money on transit, and yet we are consistently not leveraging that investment through our land use guidance and zoning. And so an example would be on the Green Line where and I think the city of St. Paul knows this today, I think they understand that this was an error, but they limited height in the eastern end of that corridor through their land use regulation, nothing that the Met Council had to do with that. But I think now residents are experiencing some of the impact of that economically. And so I'm curious about whether or not the Met Council has thought about including in your evaluation of TOD an economic element where you could actually understand if the initial investment in that transit was $1 billion, how is the land use surrounding it able to economically leverage that investment? And that I think is what's missing here. And there's certainly data to support that. That I think would be a helpful element, especially legislatively, because I will also just say in response to Jerry, to your comment, that it's seen as a boondoggle because it is subjected to a series of fits and starts in terms of how it's legislatively funded. And if you delay projects for a 10-year period or a 15-year period, of course they become more expensive. So what we're doing in the Twin Cities is continually shooting ourselves in the foot. We need transit because 50% of residents in certain parts of the community don't own a car, and that's their only option for getting around, and yet we delay projects and make them cost more money. So it's really a catch-22. It's like we wouldn't do that with road projects. 610 was not subjected to that level of scrutiny. So I'd like to see better balance in our transit investments versus our road investments. And I'd like to see a system that works better for everybody and gives you options. I rode the light rail last weekend from the farmer's market up to my friend's condominium just downtown here. It was just 2 stops. Very clean, very well maintained. It was on time. It was nice and cool in there. It was really hot outside. So again, I see it differently, but I understand what you're saying. I just want us to understand the layers of complexity in terms of funding, construction, and how these systems are working or not working for our community.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Jerry.
just to answer you a little bit, I can understand the politics, there's politics in everything. And when you got one side against it, and one side for it, and where they clash, nothing gets done. So I'd like to see a better system where people can work together better to deliver the final result quicker, cheaper, and more efficient. But to take your point, you're exactly right. My perspective in the country is I don't write it, and what I observe, this is what we observe out in the rural areas. But like I said, I'm not against light rail. I think the concept is real and good, but I think what you see so far has not been very good. So.
Thank you, Jerry. Mike?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I see a little bit missing from the conversation are just like the partnerships with the development community, like the community-based development organizations. For example, I have visited the BART, I have been in LA, and for BART, like for some of their stations, they had like strong community partnerships with like even service organizations and developers, right, to create stations and to encourage the more use of it. The other one is around the user experience. You mentioned the bathrooms. So like in LA, they even had a nice clean bathroom, a single one outside that was very nice to use. And then I'm glad to see the conversation about equity and displacement being highlighted because that should be the measure of a successful project too for TOD and for transit. And then, don't want to belabor the point about just the process and how long it takes, but I think one of the things that would be very helpful, like I may be in the opinions may differ on this, but really just to like put out a plan or like identify like our transit plan and just put that this is where the lines are and communities, if you want to get on board with this, like let's talk. Otherwise, you're going to be asking for permission from cities and partners a very long time. And that's how projects are going to be delayed. And that's someone coming into both the conversations of the bronze line and then, at the tail end of the gold line, right? So I think we have some models that we can learn already from, lessons learned. And then we just need a more better connected system. That way people will actually wanna ride it and use it to get around.
So I apologize for not directly answering the question or side discussion question, but Ms. Worthington's comments have me wondering a couple of things, and I might be putting Ms. Torres on the spot or our presenter, I'm not sure. Currently, as it stands, just to mention a specific stop since it's relevant to me, in Richfield we have 2 Orange Line stops, 66 and 76. We haven't really had our comprehensive plan be responsive to the fact that there are 10-minute headway bus stops there. Currently, it's all designated for single-family homes all over. Is that allowed? Like when we submit our new plan, are we allowed to just keep that as single-family, or are we required to be responsive to that and say you need to be able to build apartments near this transit station?
Chair, thank you, committee member, for that question. So if existing development's already there isn't a requirement to tear down a neighborhood and redevelop in a TOD manner. But where redevelopment opportunities exist, the guiding should be reflective of the new density requirements for TOD, for station areas. And those are in Imagine 2050. We did update them from the last round to be reflective of what the market has already proven to be developing around transit station areas. So the change in the land use plan would be dependent on the city and the potential for redevelopment or new development if you still have some open areas around new station areas, for example, reflective of the higher density requirements to help kind of facilitate that level of development to support the investment.
But when we do a land use planning change, we're not ever required to like proactively tear down private development, right? So why can't we just say that within a quarter mile of those types of stations, it has to be designated to allow 100 units per acre or something like that? Is that within the Met Council authority?
The community could.
But the Met Council does not require that in the same way they require like you to meet your affordable housing allocation or other requirements they impose on cities.
It's not as hard line as that.
Okay.
The density, it's about planning and really focused on the changes that the community would be expecting, where they want to accommodate forecasted growth. If the community wants to target a specific area where transit investments have been kind of planned and coming down the road, we work with the city to really encourage them to do that. But how the city meets those density requirements is up to the city.
Okay, I guess I will just say I think that's unfortunate, and I wish that there were a way that we could impose an upward related. Because honestly, like our staff, because I've raised that specific issue, that specific stop, and our staff are like, well, it's fully developed, we just don't see developer interest, it's not a priority for us to address. Were it a requirement of the Met Council as part of our comprehensive plan submission, it would be a priority, it would make itself a priority. And I think it's important because that one stop might not actually have any development interest, but if every stop within a quarter mile or half mile, or whatever you want to make it, across the region had to meet that requirement, that would open up a lot of potentially developable land for better use that would support the transit. Because most of the development along the Green Line has not been in Met Council owned sites, it's been private redevelopment. So I just wish our comprehensive plan addressed that.
We do expect that communities would be accommodating a lot of their forecasted growth in those transit station areas along transit investments. And so there may be a shift in how local governments respond to that. In the last round, we were really focused on new and redevelopment areas only. And now where the requirements are focused around where a community is expecting to accommodate their forecasted growth. So that could be a much broader kind of interpretation of that, and could hopefully kind of drive a little bit higher density in areas where communities may be expecting growth.
Okay, and then I have one other question, which is sort of the inverse of this, which is in these situations where you have council on land, how does that interact with the local zoning requirements? Like Minneapolis doesn't have any parking minimum, but if you build something in Minnetonka along, like, what's to keep it from just being transit adjacent development, not transit oriented development, where there's two spots for every apartment or something?
Chair, thank you for that question. So again, wherever we're working on projects, we work really closely with the community to understand where our goals for TOD align with their vision for redevelopment. In most of these cases, I mean, what we're looking at when we're having conversations with these communities is dense multifamily development, often with some sort of commercial component in it. So all of the projects are subject to local approval, no matter what. That remains, and we bring the community on board from the very beginning to understand what those goals are. When we're going out with a request for developer proposals, we want to make sure that we collectively are all on the same page for what they want to see, what we want to see to advance our goals for a site.
Okay, so is that when you prioritize like those 8 sites or the circled ones, is that a factor that's a compatible land use requirements?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah. So it's I mean, the two things that kind of drive where we focus our attention are like being on the same page with what the goal is for development, and then also having developer interest in a site, so making sure that we can deliver a project there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dan.
So there's a few things that I wanted to respond to. First of all, on the non-displacement, I agree that's very nice to see that as part of what we're looking at here, because certainly I don't think the objective of transit-oriented development is to completely displace neighborhoods with, and have the gentrification happen and all that sort of thing, because usually where transit is run is neighborhoods that don't necessarily have the highest income census tracts or things like that. So I think I agree with appreciating that as being an important part of it. As to the last discussion about the properties that the Met Council owns, well, my first question was going to be, well, how does the Met Council come to own those properties? And we can get into that, but as the property owner, one of the things that could be a tool in land use as you're working with the communities is to say, most communities have opportunities to sort of work within or around their zoning requirements, such as planned unit developments or variance processes or things like that, so that if for instance, parking minimums that are in a community don't necessarily contribute to the notion of transit-oriented development as well as it should, you could certainly negotiate or work with the developer in the community to negotiate a planned unit development where they exempt some of those requirements for minimums in exchange for something else that can be a benefit for the overall development. So there's always those tools out there, and I would definitely encourage Met Council to look at those and maybe even don't prioritize sites where it seems like it might be more difficult if there is some other benefit that you could gain through working with the community in those types of processes. Our experience when we did our last comprehensive plan update in Roseville is, you're absolutely right, we weren't directed to require increased densities within such a distance of every planned transit stop or every transit stop on the A line in Roseville. But we did certainly look for those opportunities. And so I think what can help from Met Council is maybe as part of the guidance to communities as they're looking to develop their next update to their comprehensive plan to maybe more emphasize looking at transit-oriented development and guiding properties that way as a very powerful tool to achieve some of the density requirements that are being looked at for communities going forward. And just as the Met Council provides that guidance to cities, promote that more in the process. If we can't make it necessarily a requirement by the Met Council, certainly more emphasis in the process. And if communities are struggling and looking for guidance on how to address some of the density requirements, that can be maybe the number one piece of advice, if it's available to a particular community, that the Met Council representatives and the people helping those communities can focus on. And then the only other piece of this whole thing that I always want to check in on is of course, because the Met Council has a role in housing and affordable housing seems to be a strong focus of transit-oriented development. But I never want us to lose sight of the importance of having jobs near transit, because one of the key reasons people move around is to go from where they live to where they work. And if you have a lot of housing near transit, but the jobs are 5 miles away, we're missing a piece, I think, in my opinion, of transit-oriented development. And so I understand that there may be limits on what Met Council can do in terms of sort of helping the job side of it, but I definitely would want to make sure that policies encourage communities to focus on the way they can have jobs near transit as well. And not just maybe, you know, service and retail jobs, but maybe there's ways to encourage the types of jobs that are being developed in the current economy, whether that's, I mean, we're seeing much more industrial, not very much office, or those types of things, that can be a part of the process as well. And so I'm not sure what that looks like in terms of what Met Council does, but I always want to make sure that we think about the jobs aspect too, because it's great if you can walk out your door and get on transit, but if you get to the other end of your trip and there's no way to get to your job, or, you know, that last mile, or the last, you know, the other piece of the transit isn't a part of the picture, I think it's important that that's looked at as well. And I'll step off my soapbox.
Any other questions on this one? Christos?
I have a couple more questions if that's.
Okay.
I think, oh, Christos had a reply.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is just back to the discussion about, you know, I know one of your goals here, for example, on slide 10 is support a 21st century transportation system through increased ridership and revenue. And I know we've had quite a lot of discussion about revenue. You know, I don't think there's probably a public transportation system in the country that runs a profit. They're probably all, it's just, you know, gradations of how much public subsidy is included. And, you know, as you're talking about the development along the Green Line, for example, $4 billion investment in housing, and was it, maybe not getting that accurate, but.
That's right.
And then $4 billion in commercial development as well. And what percentage of that comes in as revenue for the local city that can also reflect on the impact of public transportation in the community? When you look at it as a straight up number and a delay, you know, in construction and tripling the cost, in isolation, it can absolutely look like a boondoggle, but how is it actually impacting commerce and communities? I think that might be helpful.
Chair, committee member, we had started doing some analysis around that just to understand where we're seeing this development near our transitways, how much revenue is that generating for the communities? And we haven't done this, actually this is similar work that Heather has done as well, but we did it along the Metro Green Line just to see how much development has happened along the corridor and what is the revenue that's being generated. And we've seen about 200 million in additional revenue just along that corridor every single year. And as more development happens, that will continue to grow. Now that's revenue that's going to counties, cities, schools along those areas. A portion of it's going to the state, but it's a pretty substantial amount. And again, that's every year, and it will continue to grow as more development happens.
Mr. Chair, could you enlighten me, do you work for like the Metropolitan Airports Commission?
Do I work for
Yes.
Metropolitan? So I work for Metro Transit in the office, or Transit-Oriented Development Office for Metro Transit.
Who is that? I mean,
Within the Metropolitan Council.
Oh, within
Yes,
the
that's a
Met- oh,
division
it's in the
within the
council.
Metropolitan
Okay, I
Council, so
got
they
you.
service
Okay.
the Metropolitan Council.
okay. So I mean, the Met Council is tasked to run the light rail lines, correct? Yes, and the bus service, is that correct? Okay.
For an area within the region. I mean, there are multiple transit operators, but Metro Transit covers a large service area. But there are other transit operators that cover other areas within the region as well.
Yeah, but it's pretty much a 7-county metro area then? Yeah, okay.
Portions of it, yeah.
And then, just the last thought that I've been having, and I've mentioned this before to folks, is just, you know, we just got a presentation about land use, right? We know what cities are planning for or where those areas are, and we know where the roads are. It's like, can we just get a map of like where those ideas or a connected system, what that would look like, right? And then, and also then start working with cities, of like, what do you think about this? And try and identify those routes, because it is taking a very long time. I'm just looking at the list about all the other routes, and we're looking out so far. And so that's why when we have large projects like the Blue Line, that gets all this, it sucks up the attention, right? About like that this is not something that's working. So if that's something that could be provided or like considered for feedback too, that would be really helpful for, you know, just even as counties, it would be helpful for us. Yeah.
I'll just say that transit does that already, it's in the transportation policy plan. We can share that out after. It's in the network.
For an entire connected system of
The
transit.
plan system.
Yeah, okay.
I could just add an example to that, so we know that the G line, I think it's the G line is planned for Rice Street and Robert. The letter's wrong, correct me, but so when we look at our comprehensive plan update that we're gonna be undertaking in Roseville, we're gonna be looking for those, again, for those opportunity sites on Rice Street to sort of target for redevelopment as transit-oriented development, so that will be part of our focus. Because we know that that line is in the plan, and I think it's one of the ones that's gonna be coming along sooner, so that helps us have some incentive to get that done, but you're right, yeah, there's kind of a long-range overall picture.
That's awesome.
And share. Communities were also provided what those plans were like. What does the Met Council infrastructure look like in your community as part of our system? That was provided to all of the communities as part of their system statement when we issued those in September last year. So like Member Rowe was saying, he knows that there's an upcoming planned route in his community. All of the communities were provided with that same information.
Wonderful, thank you.
So the next question that I have up is, when you think about transit investments, what should they produce for the region? For riders, for communities, for housing, for the economy? What are the outcomes that we should be focusing on through this TOD policy?
Heather, that one comment you made, you said 40 to 50% of people don't own cars. So I think light rail or mass transit should be more in line to accommodate those kind of folks. Otherwise, what do they do, take cabs or walk? I mean, so I think a lot of that should be addressed to those kind of people, because they're the ones that are gonna ride it. Me, probably not so much, but somebody like that, so.
And that's in certain areas, Jerry, just to be clear that that's not citywide, that's not 7-county metric, that's for certain neighborhoods within certain cities where car ownership is very low. So again, it's, I think you're absolutely right, targeting into those areas demographically where we understand there's a greater need for alternatives to a personal vehicle. I think that's absolutely right.
I think on this question, we've talked about it really, where it's just gonna be dependent on what the community's needs are, right? Whether it's gonna be for housing, whether it's gonna be economic, whether it's to create more of a community-based center or for the riders. It's gonna be based on what those areas really want, right? If we're gonna try and come into one area and say, well, we suggest you do affordable housing, but they have a lot more affordable housing already adjacent, then we maybe need to switch it more towards an economic approach for that area. I think that's where the majority of the conversation has been here, is we need to be flexible when it comes to that. We can't just do it specifically for housing. We need to change what we want depending on what the communities want in those areas.
Just to kind of build on that and my prior comment too, if a particular property that's owned by Met Council, may not fit well with housing for any of those various reasons, are there other tools that the Met Council could use to promote the other type of development, whether that may just be giving up ownership of the land to the development or some way of doing that to incentivize the other types of development that can be beneficial, but at the same time, it's the only tool maybe that might be available, but so I just don't know. So the point being is maybe look at other ways or other tools that might be able to be used, where the Met Council, if they have land, can contribute positively to the redevelopment or the development in a transit-oriented way, but it may not be housing because that's not what seems to be the best fit.
Anybody else on this question?
Building on what you said earlier, I think it's important that you're connecting people to a variety of destinations, not just housing or not just, like the US Bank Stadium or something. I live in the happy little triangle of the B line, the E line, and the Green Line extension, so I can kind of get anywhere, which is nice.
It shall be henceforth called the Happy Little Triangle.
And the last question that we have is where can the council provide the most value to communities interested in cultivating transit-ready or transit-supportive neighborhoods, stationary planning, policy, technical assistance, resources, best practices? What can we do to support communities that want to advance projects, even if it's not on council-owned land?
I work for the city of Plymouth, and so we've got our own transit agency, but I know we're enthusiastic about the idea of transit-oriented development coming to our city. So we're doing small area plans, and we have city-owned land along Highway 55 there, but I don't know what the bottleneck is or what the next step is, but I think I like that I saw a lot of community engagement, or that was a focus of this new policy update is like meeting with communities rather than doing a one-size-fits-all approach to it. So collaboration, open-mindedness, that will be important.
Building on that, Robert, if I might, I think there's a real opportunity for building greater awareness in the community about why this matters. And I think I might say that's educational, but I really think it's more about building awareness. And that's kind of how I would think about it, because I don't think that people really understand the linkages between, to your point, Mayor Rowe, about work, jobs, kind of the economic sustainability of your family is really dependent on how you get to that job. And so I think that's one component of it. And the other is, if you go back to your slide where you had all the different elements of why you do this work, right? The little icons you had.
Yeah.
I think there's maybe a great kind of like social media campaign there where people can really start to learn why this is important. And it just feels like that's sort of missing in the public commons right now. And so it gets replaced by a lot of kind of argument about transit that, when you boil it right down, people generally are pretty supportive of it. And that kind of gets lost, that message gets lost. The other thing I'll just say about this, having worked with so many different communities in the Twin Cities over my career and in my current role, I think the one thing I hear most often is they don't have the planning resources on staff. And so I know Met Council does great planning grant work, but I think this is where if there was a sort of TOD planning grant, and I think there might be actually, I think I'm making that up, but I'm not making it up. If there was something like that was really directed at working with cities to figure out how to do more effective stationary planning, for instance, that would be a way to do that more effectively and really making sure that that's well funded.
I can provide an example of just similar to that experience of like the B line that connected through the decision to move it to Selby to the Capitol. I worked in the Ward 1 office at that time, and the planning took a while, right? And so it would oftentimes, like myself as staff at that time, just was unclear about like where some of the decision points were happening, as well as the community engagement. But I also want to say, like, you have successes, like that's an example. And I think just sharing the story about how transit can transform communities goes a long ways. I just went back there recently and I'm like, wow, it's changed just within like 5 years. And you see development happening all along there, nice crosswalks, it's nice, it fits in within the character. And I just recall a phone call that I got from my office at that time where a restaurant owner was like, did you hear about this? They're gonna put a bus right in front of my restaurant. I'm not gonna get the nice view anymore. And that didn't happen. So I just wanna say, like, there have been successful projects. We need to continue to like lift those up and just find like even compare pictures about what it can look like.
Yeah, and if I may just build on that really quickly, during Green Line construction, because I was working on that in my role at the time, we actually had a net increase in business development on University Avenue during construction. Like that got buried somewhere, right? And so I think that's not really well understood. And I think it's just a great example of like the communications opportunity here.
And to build upon that, I think just highlighting those wins like you're talking about is, because how often do we actually go back towards the green line and talk about what the community looks like now, what the business looks like, how that whole area has been revitalized and how the community feels today. It hasn't opened up yet, but how they feel today compared to how they felt before a shovel was even in the ground during construction. Nobody wants to be around the construction, but after it happened, or even in the process, as Heather was talking about, the uptick in business, we're missing out on that opportunity on talking what great things we actually do and how the community feels today afterwards.
Chair Morales, if I may. I appreciate the presentation, and I don't want this to be too peripheral, and I think that if you are the ones funding like art installments at stations, that I would encourage that to continue. I think aside from helping with like providing a real sense of place other than like, oh, that's a bus station or a train station, those, you know, they're commissioned, so they create a job for somebody temporarily at least. They create that sense of place and pride. And like, if I Google hard enough, I can probably find studies that suggest that like places where art is present, it's like it has a calming effect, I would guess, on some of the maybe unwanted behaviors and stuff that are sadly, you know, presented in the news quite a bit.
Chair, thank you for those comments. We actually do have somebody on staff that helps maintain and also add to the art installations across the system. I know that they've done really incredible work. We're actually adding one at the North Loop Garage next week. But it's, I can't remember what the statistic is. I think we own the largest array of public art in the state through Metro Transit. And there's some, we have been using that as a strategy on bus shelters to prevent graffiti and other things, and it's been very successful.
Any other feedback for Michael?
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing as we don't have anything else on the agenda, this meeting is adjourned. Enjoy the smoky hot day.
There you go, you going down.
Yes, sir.
It's the only meeting to smoke.